In this video, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at automating different parameters on the Machine Mark III controller. While there are quite a few different types of automation that you can do for live performances with things like the lock controls and by recording it in, by using things like the automation button, we're going to be focusing on how to program these automations through the step sequencer on the actual Machine Mark III controller. The automation in Machine is a bit different than traditional digital audio workstations. Instead of having dedicated automation lanes like you may have in Ableton or Logic, the automation that you create inside of Machine is contained within your pattern clips. The bonus of having your automation contained within these clips is that whenever you copy over a pattern, all the automation is also copied with it. Because in a traditional digital audio workstation, the automation would be on its own separate channel, and then you have to go in and copy and paste each individual section. But in the case of Machine, because everything's done inside of the pattern clips, it'll copy over everything so you can easily compose different sections. So what we're going to be doing is showing how to sequence automation on the controller. So let's first load in a reverb unit onto our drum group that we have. And for this example, we're going to be automating the dry wet control of the reverb. So move over to the plugin browser, push encoder to get a new effect. And we're going to scroll down to the reverb unit, press that to load it up. And that just sounds like this on our current drum pattern. So traditionally, if I wanted to record an automation in Machine, I could just press the play button on the controller and then hold the auto write button, which can be found in the upper left-hand corner, then just move the knob that I want to automate on the controller as my pattern clip is playing back. And as you can hear with that example, the dry wet of our reverb is automated to turn on at the very end of our bar. You can also see that this change has been recorded down in the automation section of our pattern clip. But what if we wanted to have a little bit more control over how the automation was actually entered in? What we can do on the Machine sequencer is enter in automations from the different steps on the step sequencer. This is actually a feature that many people don't really know about, and it can give you a lot more exact control over your automation clips. So for now, to undo what we've just recorded, we can hit Shift and then Clear Auto. And this will remove the automation clip that we've just recorded. So first, to make this a little bit easier, let's navigate over to Step and make sure that it's set to 16th notes. And then we want to move into our sequencer mode, the step sequencer mode, or otherwise this won't work properly. So make sure if you're going to automate through the step sequencer that you're in the step mode and not in one of the other pad modes of the controller so that everything works properly. I have a simple drum groove that I pre-recorded. And then the automation that I want to create is I want to turn on our reverb to 100% wet. So we'll be automating the dry wet of our reverb every single time the snare hits. And then I want to turn it off just before the next kick hits. So the way that you do this is you have to press and hold down the pad that corresponds to the step that you want to sequence. And this will pull up the effects controls. So looking at the snare, you'll see that our sound hits at the second and fourth quarter note of every bar. So what we do is we hold down the pad that we want to sequence our automation on, and then we go in and make our adjustment on the settings that we see. We'll turn that to 100%, and then I can release it. And then now if we look down in our sequencer in our software, you'll see that for that specific section, the dry wet of the reverb has been automated to turn on to 100%. And then we could do that for the next 4 16th notes. So hold down the pad, turn the mix all the way up. And then we could do that for the last snare drum as well. And you can see that change too down in the software sequencer. So now whenever I play everything back, you'll hear that the dry wet has been automated on our reverb unit. Now on the controller, there's no way to directly view the automation like we can in the sequencer, down in this section where we see the curves all drawn in. But what we can still see if we're sequencing out a note pattern is the different automation values that we have on each of the different steps. So if I hold down a pad, we can see what the effects control settings are for that specific section. So if I hold down this first pad, you'll see that the mix is set to 0. And then if I hold down this pad where our snare drum sound is, you'll see that it's at 100%. And you can just kind of quickly go through each section to check and see what the automation is. So there's no direct way to view a nice automation curve like you can down in the sequencer, but if you're trying to sequence everything directly from the controller, then this is still something that's pretty helpful. This method of entering in manual automations through the step sequencer works for any automatable parameter inside the machine software. So say for example, we wanted to have a flanger effect. So we could go over to our effects devices, navigate over, load in a new effect. Let's see, we want to do a flanger. So load that in. And then we could do something like maybe on the snare drum sound, it turns up to 100%. And also make sure that you're in the step mode or it won't work properly. So hold that down, turn it on 100%. Maybe do that for the second half of that section too. And that sounds like this. So what you can hear there is we're already kind of getting a more interesting pattern just through using different methods of automation. This also works for things that aren't effects as well. So if I wanted to automate a specific section of the sampler in Maschine, I could do that too. So let's navigate over to the plugin browser. Let's go to our sound. And then let's make sure that our snare drum sound is selected. Let's go back to the browser. And then we could scroll over here until we see the tune control. And then I can go to my step view and turn that up to something a bit higher. And that would sound like this. So just like you heard in that previous example, and we can also see it reflected down in the software as well, the pitch controls of the snare have been adjusted for that individual 16th note. And just keep in mind as well, if you wanted to enter in a little bit longer automation values into the sequencer, you can just go over to your grid mode and select a different grid setting from this section. Or you could even enter in faster automations as well, just depends on how you want to set up your step sequencer. So you can actually get quite a bit of different effect settings out of automating different parameters on the Maschine controller. So that shows how to automate through step sequencing on the Maschine Mark III controller. So that's all for this video on step sequencing automation. Join me in the next video where we'll be putting these ideas together and showing how to use them in context of making a quick song. Thanks, and I'll see you there.